My name is Arne Rubinstein, and I'm very happy to be joined by my longtime friend, Lockie Cooke. And I would like to start by paying my respects to the Indigenous people of this land. I am on the land of the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I know that this land where I currently reside has a very strong history and a very strong cultural history. So it's with great respect that I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land.
Deadly. I might jump in there as well, Arne, and pay my respects. So to the local Noongar Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. This is Budja country where I grew up on, and I'm very, very lucky and fortunate to have many guides and mentors and guardians over my time here, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So thanks a lot for that, Arne.
Great. So Lockie, it is great to have you on today, and thank you for joining us. I know you've got a lot on, and you're a new dad. Actually, we should just start. Tell us about your baby. How old's your baby? Baby's name? What are they doing?
Baby is little Harvey Cooke. He is 4 months old today. And as you can tell, I don't know, my face, my eyes, a few shadows under my eyes last night was a shocker. We thought we were getting better. And I think we're about to experience Harvey with his first kind of flu or cold or something, because he's being a bit weird the last 24, 48 hours where he's, waking up a lot, not settling himself as well. So that's Harvey, but he's been beautiful, little gorgeous baby, smiling, just a bundle of joy. And yeah, super, super stoked to be a dad.
Yeah, tell me, just quickly tell us about how it's going being a dad.
It's there's all this joy, love, and it's just this amazing thing that I find every day where there's just pure soul that you get to connect with. It's just it's just pure, clean, beautiful energy that you see this kid, and that's something I didn't expect. I've heard of it, and that's been amazing. Where like every day I've been lucky to be with my baby here, and just look him in the morning and just have this kind of flow of joy and love, which has been amazing. Then there's been this whole other side of the relationship side around like the realities of being a parent. I think a lot of people talk about, having a parent is great, amazing. But then there's this other side of it where you're sleep deprived, you're probably not doing the same exercise routine you used to, and nutrition and socialization and everything like that. That's a bit of a rite of passage, and it's not easy, but it's something obviously that you're bonded together to be through as loving, supportive parents. So, that's been a dance me and my partner going through, and she's been amazing, how she's been showing up as a mum, and, seeing her as well, stepping her into her womanhood, and really just being an amazing mum has been such a blessing to be able to watch and see and be a supporter of, which has been amazing. One of the big things is actually seeing my dad soften up so much as well.
Your dad softened, did you say?
Yeah, I guess I'll probably go into it more of a yarn while we talk about this. But, my old man, my family, my dad's side have all been farmers. So traditionally quite, pretty, not very emotional, pretty kind of cold and not too communicative. But then all of a sudden, baby's coming into his life and he's just softened up massively, saying goo goo gaga, holding him, wanting him to come around all the time and hold him. It's been pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I had the same thing with my dad. When we were growing up, we weren't allowed to sit in the front seat of the car. We always had to sit in the back seat. There are all these rules about everything. My kids come along, and I remember Jarrah was about 3 or 4 years old, and Dad rocks up and takes him out and puts Jarrah in the front seat of the car. And my dad became this beautiful, soft, loving. He's rolling around on the ground with it's a beautiful thing. And, this is not actually what this podcast was originally about, but it's so important, it's worth mentioning that this connection between grandparents and grandchildren is so special. In fact, they say that grandparents and grandchildren, this is just a saying, have a special bond because they have a common enemy. And, make of it what you will. But the beautiful thing is when it's done well, grandchildren and grandparents, what the grandchildren get is they get unconditional love and attention, and they get seen, and they learn. They get knowledge from the grandparents. And the grandparents get someone to love and to have it, give that affection to pass on their knowledge and to tell their stories. And the other thing that the grandparents get is they get energy, which is something they need. So it's a really beautiful exchange. And then within that then frees up the ones in the middle, the adults, the parents, to go and do whatever it is they have to do. So I'm very, very happy to hear that your dad, I don't know whether your mum is around as well.
Yeah, she is.
Great.
Yeah.
Grandparents in the lives of the grandchildren is just such a special thing. Very beautiful.
Well, it's been interesting because you have this rite of passage to me and my partner. She's from Sydney, grew up in Perth, and then me growing up in Perth, going over to Sydney, living there the last few years. And you have this kind of adult, this ego where I'm like, oh, I'm an independent man myself living in Sydney, raising this child. And then it's interesting how come the lockdown situation, we've left Sydney, come back to Perth. And I think intellectually we're like, oh, we're fine in Sydney without our grandparents. We'll get by. But then coming here and experiencing exactly what you're saying, it's hard to express around how you could fill that void. How we could do what we've done without it. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Lockie. That's a really good introduction. I love hearing that. Now, Lockie, we are going to get to iYarn and what you do. But with all of my guests, I do like to hear a bit of their story. And having known you as long as I have and sat in, quite a number of circles with you on camp in different places around, I would love for you to share a bit of your story, especially when you're a teenager, when you're at school. A lot of our work is actually aimed at teenagers and that school period when things happen that can be so influential for the rest of their lives. So just love to hear some of your story around that time and some of the sort of the big events that impacted on you. And before you do, big shout out to Peter Lennon, who's tuning in from Canberra, and Pete's doing great stuff over there in Canberra, getting camps going in all sorts of different ways. Good to have you on, Peter. Thank you. And I'll hand over to you, a little bit of your story before we move into actually talking about iYarn.
Yeah, thanks, Arne. It was interesting, really kind of divulging, going deeper around my story. I was asked recently to go to my old school and present around my journey as a young lad. And I think a lot of the time we kind of think about the last 10 years as a young adult, but then I had to rewind a bit, another 10 years into being a teen as well, and thinking about where I was there. And I think where I was when I was a teen, I was, I grew up on Noongar Budja, as I said, originally from the country in the wheat belt in Tamman, grew up in the Perth metro area, pretty privileged white kid, and going up to all boys school. And one of the big things, sport was always such a rock for me, and outdoors and exploring and going and having and spearfishing, something me and my dad used to do together. Through that journey. But one of the challenging things was I was actually one of these kids who early on I was actually kind of bullied because I was held back a year into year one. And, a few young kids got the wind that actually I got held back because my finger paintings were really bad. And so, that was a funny little thing that was, it started off a bit of humor, but I could say that now, but in the moment I was like, oh God, I'm a bit stupid, am I? That's why I'm held back. But then through the journey of year 6 to year 7, it was really interesting. One of the headmasters at the school kind of said, actually, one of the most challenging things for a young boy particularly is being held back a year. It can be kind of as disruptive to a young person's development as sometimes like a divorce can be as painful as a kid, or a bunch of other things. It's right up there, one of the real kind of bits of trauma that can impact a young person's development. So then the school actually accepted me to go up a year to year 7. Wow. And without, I'd like to say I was super smart and I was ready, but I wasn't. But they said, yeah, for his development, we'll let him do that. And that was amazing. I felt a bit more calm in that role with my year group. But then over the next few years of high school, it wasn't until year 12 when I realized actually there's some big fundamental gaps in my basic English and maths and all that. And I was in all the support classes in school. Mum, generally thought there's something wrong with me. So I went to different psychs a lot of the time, got diagnosed with ADD, ADHD. I was on medication through most of my high school, Concerta, once a day, at the beginning of the day to help me concentrate and focus. And then it wasn't until kind of in year 11 when I was 16 when I kind of actually got diagnosed with dyslexia. And then for me, that's where I started understanding how I learned and how I was the best way for me to do it. And understanding how I learned really was such an empowering thing for me to realize, get into a study plan like that. And I ended up doing just literally, I never wrote notes. It was all vision boards and word boards where I just, visualized all the learnings and studies and everything. I ended up finishing school and getting a pretty good grade. So that was kind of my school experience. And, a bunch of different, I was very fortunate through that journey. I went up to the Kimberley as part of a school kind of outbound service learning experience. The school just started an Indigenous scholarship program where they supported a few Indigenous kids to go to the school through scholarships. And they had a time where there was about 80 young Indigenous boys from the Kimberley went on a men's leadership camp held by Gandua, which is a leading Indigenous sport and rec organisation. And me and two other guttiers, white fellas, went up there and just had the most wild time, made spears, caught mud crabs, sat around the campfire and just listened to these stories that have been passed on for generation and generation, thousands of generations, of connecting the country and going through what these boys are going through with me there. And I just was like, wow, this is amazing. I love the outdoors and all this, but I never really connected with that side of Australia. So through, after that amazing experience, made some real strong bonds and friendships, came through the communities on the way through and saw there's a big gap between me as a privileged white bloke from Perth and a lot of these young Indigenous kids growing up in the community. They didn't have libraries, didn't have sport equipment, and there's a big gap between that experience. So got together with a few mates at the end of that trip and ended up setting up a bit of a fundraiser to open up the first library in Beagle Bay community.
How old are you at this stage?
This was when I was 16, 17, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so that was cool and did that. And that was essentially the creation of iSEAL, which is a large youth reconciliation organisation where we young people led and operated and where young people went around the country and facilitated spaces for people to learn more about, reconciliation. We had 3 pillars of what we did with iSEAL: creating positive experiences, building meaningful relationships, and developing deeper meaningful understanding, connecting with Aboriginal people, country, and culture. So, we did that through facilitation, cultural awareness trainings in corporates, community groups, and schools. But then also, we used to have this surf event, Arne, I know you love. We had up to 16,000 people down at Cop Beach for this called the IC Classic, which is a youth surfing comp celebrating Noongar culture and First Nation culture, which was just a wild thing. We ran it for 9 years. It was awesome.
Oh, it's brilliant. I just love hearing that, Lockie. Fantastic. So good. And well, what an incredible opportunity. Hey, big shout out to Nick Johnson, principal of Bishop Druitt College in Coffs Harbour, and Nick and his team have introduced rites of passage into all sorts of different year levels and groups at the school. So fantastic to have you on, Nick. And Ross Harold from Riverside College up in Maryborough, who is also looking at ways that we can bring rites of passage into the school up there. So thanks, Nick and Ross, for joining us. And I'm not sure who Fee is, but thank you for joining us as well. And putting your name on. Anybody who's there, please, if you could write your name down and where you're listening from, we love to know. So, and if you have comments and questions as we go, also that's fantastic. Now, Lockie,
I've just got a heads up as well that the live video is via the Rites of Passage Facebook page, but not on the event page. So maybe on the event page.
Okay. Well, Sophie will.
Yeah, Sophie will get on to that. Yeah. No worries, because I think we were sharing it out to a few people there. Happy days. Yeah, so that's a bit of my story, Arne. Back then, and You know,
Right.
I was very
But
lucky.
Lockie, you were also quite an athlete when you were young. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when I was running ICEA, I was a bit lost. Like, I loved sport at school, but then all of a sudden you have this big moment where all of a sudden sports, you're doing 1 to 2 training sessions a day with swimming or water polo or football or what athletics running, and all of a sudden you do levers and it's done. And then for me, I was very lucky. I love the ocean. I love surfing, but the surf club was a big thing for me. And I went down there and literally what am I going to do? I'm going to swim, I'm going to run, or whatever it is. And then I saw some of the fittest blokes down at the surf club, and they were all the ski paddlers. They're coming off the water at 6:30 or 7 a.m. of being on for an hour and a half. And I was like, shit, I want to do that. And then I essentially just started paddling, falling in every time I got in the boat for the first few weeks and months. And then I just had a red hot crack, and I just found a really great supportive group of mentors and men who really were such a pivotal role in my life. And through that, they were so supportive. They gave me a surf club ski and a paddle, and I started paddling. And next minute, I got into the finals for the Aussie Surf Lifesaving Champs. It's got me into a development squad in the for WAST, the West Australian Institute of Sport. And then I got into the national finals, and then I got in a WAST scholarship, and then I ended up representing Australia and sprint kayaking in both K1, K4, K2, which was just an amazing experience. Competed over in Europe, and it's just an amazing opportunity for me.
Wow, fantastic! It's you got an extraordinary story, Lockie. So I love hearing that. Oh, nice to have Megan Brueggemann from Bishop Druitt College also in Coffs Harbour here joining us. Thank you. And Sarah Davies from Liza in Victoria. Great. I just love seeing who actually listens into these conversations. So please, if you're there, let us know. And we've got Katrine from Spears Point in New South Wales. So thank you also for joining. So Lockie, you are now CEO of iYarn. And could you, from just from a basic level, explain to us, what iYarn is, and more importantly, how did you get to create iYarn?
Well, I think iYarn's a kind of culmination of a lot of my experience that I've had as a young man. That experience that I shared about up in Gandua at Men's Leadership Camp, coming together and having yarns and having stories, really planted a seed in my mind and opened another doorway for me to the chapter that created iYarn.
And so Lockie, we usually have people listening from internationally. So could you just explain what's a yarn? What does yarn mean? It's a very Australian word.
Yeah, so there's a lot of a yarn. It's a good one. When I'm in America, they're like, yarn, is that some sort of Chinese word? It's funny. Not to take the piss out of any Americans listening in, but a yarn is like people coming together and having a deep and meaningful conversation. Obviously, like the word in our English encyclopedia, yarn is about weaving cotton, sewing together. And the idea is a yarn, if you go a bit deeper, is weaving stories together to come to something maybe bigger when you come together and share stories.
And is it an English word? Is it an English word, or is it an Indigenous word?
No, well, the word yarn there's like if you're on Instagram or Facebook, there's like yarn societies, which is actually people who love sewing. That's the yarn, is to sew. It's a word. I should probably have deeper definitions of it. So I was like, a word yarn, but the word iYarn actually can come from a few different ways from my story. So with ICEA, I was culturally adopted by an Aboriginal family in Adialun, One Arm Point community. It was a bit of an honour for me. Got my name Binjali. And what that meant was like going to the next level of becoming, connected to that family and that community. But the big thing was previously, I come in as a white fella. Oh, Lockie, good to see you, mate. How you going? To actually all of a sudden I'm part of kin, part of family. What that means, there's cultural protocols to connecting with community. And, I could go on more about those cultural protocols, but one of the foundations to Bardi culture, my Ijai family, is this word called Liyarn. So iYarn is a word for your body, your emotions, your mind, your spirit, your everything. And so whenever you go into community, people, your kin will say, Binjali, Guruna iYarn, like Lockie, how is your iYarn?
Wow.
And what that means is really creating that safe space to check in on that person. How is your iYarn? Do you have a heavy iYarn and you're feeling a bit down now? Or do you have a light iYarn? You're feeling good, you're feeling strong. And this is so powerful, and this is how our lives got, worlds got intertwined on it, because when I was in community, a typical white fella, Western young kid coming to community, my mum say, every time I went up to this is a story that is a really kind of pressing around tipping point for me, was I went in the community, my mum says, how's your iYarn? I go, well, iYarn's good. I just want to go spearfishing now, catch ya. Up in One Arm Point, beautiful fish everywhere, love it. When I came back with big mob of fish, I was super stoked. My mum was growled at me. She goes, Lockie, that was disrespectful. I asked you how your iYarn was, and you really didn't create that safe space for me to share what was really going on, but at least didn't ask how I'm going.
And you just said, I'm good. You just said, I'm good, which is the most common thing you'll hear in Australia when you ask someone how they're going. I'm good. Very interesting. And what are the 4 elements of iYarn that they're checking in on?
It's far deeper than this like this basic way, but essentially it's like the culmination of your body, your emotion, your mind, your spirit, your everything, your aura, how you vibe.
Your body, your mind, your emotion, and your spirit. Wow, how fantastic. I love it. Okay, let's keep going. So the story of how you got to iYarn and develop iYarn.
So yeah, that was, and then long story short, I was like, wow, this is a powerful way to really create safe spaces to check in. And then essentially, sadly, mid-20s, I had a few mates who took their last suicide. And people in my community, I had about 9 people I knew in a period of about 3 years. It was wild. And I was like, this is just crazy. And and sadly, I've lost a couple of uncles to suicide. And the sad thing, I remember one time I left the funeral, the service, and just checked in with with a mate, and like, God, we just got to check in on each other more. Like, we would just do anything to check in on that person. And so that's just that was the seed in my mind. And then the idea from the experience from the Kimberley, the safe way to check in on people, I used to do it with a few friends. And then the idea of iYarn came up to me, where how do we create a solution, a digital solution that can help people facilitate safe spaces to truly check in on people. And initially it was all about peer-to-peer, like me to do it with my mates. But then over time, the platforms evolved around actually checking in on people in all walks of life. And a big part of our iYarn community is working in schools and checking in on young people and their wellbeing, along with teachers as well. So how does it work? Imagine the life wheel. So for those of you who don't know the life wheel, a mentor of mine used to say, when we used to catch up and check in on each other, he used to draw a circle, and he goes, Lockie, life's a lot like a bike wheel. Imagine the spokes of the bike wheel, different areas of your life: family, friends, relationships, career, homework, study, whatever it is. And 0 on, if you've got to give yourself a score, 0 to 10 out of these different areas of life. 0 in the middle, towards the middle of the bike wheel, and 10 on the outside. And then connect all the dots of the spokes. And what you'll find is that when the bike wheel is not very circle, it's a bit of a rough journey. But the idea is that life's always a bit of a rough journey. But it's about you being aware of where those gaps are on that wheel that helps you become more self-aware, and when those bumps are about to come up. So when you've got better self-awareness, you can actually connect with others and have a deep, meaningful conversation. So I love that when I drew that down on a piece of paper, and my mentor and I had real deep and meaningful conversations. So we've essentially turned that into a digital application that is safe and secure to use for schools on scale.
So people get it on their phone?
We've managed to develop both a native application, which means it can be downloaded off the Apple Store, Google Store, so anyone listening in can do this right now. But actually in school environments, we're trying to shy away from the native application downloads because kids aren't endorsed to use phones on campus. So we encourage people to go to iYarn.com and log in via the web-based platform. So when I say web-based platform, the platform is built on the same infrastructure as Facebook. So you've got an interface on your mobile app, but also on Safari or Chrome or any Internet Explorer has the same interface. The Internet Explorer on your computer has a fair few more sophistication to it with templates and things like that. But yeah, it's on both web-based and that to allow for students to use in school.
Okay, so I'm a student at school. My school's got iYarn. I download the app, or I get on it on one of the servers, and I've got the app in front of me. What happens then?
Great. So this is a big point of difference for iYarn, is that the school have custom, culturally appropriate check-in segments that they want to do for the kids. So like say the year 8 group, you want to check in on different segments to year 12 group. It's just different degrees of maturity, right? You know, Arne better than anyone, the maturity levels of year 8 compared to year 12. So the year group coordinator...
You do a rite of passage in between, actually.
Exactly. We hope so. So the idea is that the year group and the school psych or the counsellors, the year group coordinators, the pastoral care leader chooses segments that they believe are relevant for the young people to do a check-in. So that could be, hey, sleep is a very common one, friends, well-being, and then even safety is a very common one. Because then what happens, how the school uses it, the teacher goes, hey guys, at the beginning of class, once a week or twice a week, and in some cases, for more, case management of at-risk kids and things like that, they do a daily check-in just to see, and the kid gives themselves a scrolling score 0 to 10, how they're going in that moment of time. And then from there, the teacher sees that, and then they can see how everyone's going. And the school actually has custom emails that they can send to the young person if they have a red flag score. So a red flag score could be if someone puts a low score of, say, 2 or 3 for a segment like mental health or sleep, they get support resources in that moment. That could be kids helpline, that could be the school psych's contact details, the counsellors, the calendar, reach out, educational resources that are publicly available. You name it, the school can send that to the kid to support them in that moment. But then also the teacher can get support resources to how to maybe, what is the process around supporting that kid if they put in that low score.
Yeah. And are the schools seeing everybody's results regardless, or do they only see them if there's a level of red flag there?
So that you can have multiple administrators of a check-in. So that could be the year group coordinator, the pastoral care lead, and maybe even the school psych, for example. But no one can see the kids' data unless they're an authorised administrator of the space. And the young kids obviously can't see each other's check-ins. It's just between them. I think that I understood your question. I may have missed it.
So what I'm interested in is, if I'm the teacher, can I scroll through every kid's results, or do I only get their results if there's some sort of red flag?
No, you have both options. You always get a notification as an administrator if there's been a red flag, just for duty of care. You don't want a young person to put in a low score and then you're not aware of it. Kids can choose to opt in whether they want to follow up or not. But yeah, the teacher also, it's really useful for like parent-teacher nights, because, it doesn't always have to be about mental health and well-being. It can actually be about student performance. Like we've got currently, one of our biggest clients is actually the AIS, the Australian Institute of Sport, who are using it to check in on athletes to help optimize performance. So we've got a lot of schools actually using it for their first sport, rugby team or growing team or whatever, to actually support that person's in, weight training, recovery, strength, agility, whatever the metrics they want to check in on.
Yeah. And what about if, let's say me and my 6 best mates, can we set up an iYarn group between us and see each other's results?
Yeah. So you literally create a wheel. What I tend is best practice is that your segments of life, Arne, are probably going to be different to mine. I'm a dad, you're a granddad. Correct? You are a granddad.
Sort of.
I know. Kind
Well, I
of.
have an
You are
adopted
right.
son in Sri Lanka who has two beautiful children who I consider my grandchildren. So
Correct.
on that level, I am.
Yeah. So maybe there's different segments, right? So we can.
I'm
I
in a
can.
different life stage from you, Lockie.
Yes. Thank you. So my segments could be like you're on a Mao, I'm on a shortboard. You know, different phases of life, right? And so we may want to check in on different things. I can share my check-in to you, and then vice versa, or I can just give you admin access so you can see my check-in as well. So it's really quite powerful that you can do that with a group of mates. What we're finding, it's really important to not be prescriptive, because I find there's a lot of platforms out there saying these are the 8 areas of well-being. These are the 10 areas of a flourishing life. But actually, you're your own self, and empowering individuals to choose the segments they want to check in, like values, and then check in on them regularly is really powerful. Like for me, I've got my app here, and I check in on. I've got my own well-being check-in segments that I've been doing for the last 18 months of using iYarn. I've got my little. I don't know if we can see this here. This is on the native application. That's my last check-in.
There's your wheel. Let's see your wheel. Hold it there. Yeah.
Yeah. And these are the different. Oh, there we go. And then I can see actually how I've trended over time. Long way. And then I can see, there's a bit of a dip there. I don't know what happened there. I think that was just before we had the baby, a few fights. Probably at 2 a.m. in the morning, I did a bit of a check-in with myself. It's interesting. I tend to do check-ins when I'm pretty dire. But what I find when I kind of put not pen to paper, figures to my dashboard and write down as a bit of a journal, cool. This is just a point of time. This is where I'm at right now, but I know I've been here before, and I've made it through the other end, and it's all good.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful when I have a yarn with a mate, mentor, peer, and share that, and then that can open some really interesting yarns.
Great. So much we can talk about here. So also want to say hello to Sue Burgoyne from Croydon North, who we know, and Margaret Benbow from Albury, New South Wales. We've also got Ryan Griffith logging in from Wurundjeri country, and you've got a great question there, which we'll get to in a little bit. But before that, what's so interesting, I love when sort of things happen from different directions. So I'm a big fan of the check-in. And anybody who knows me and works with me knows that that's, basically pretty much the time I meet someone or at the beginning of a meeting, I go, let's have a check-in. And we used to just do our check-ins randomly and say, right, let's just have a check-in. And then as we've been working more in schools and with groups, we put some more form around a check-in. Because once again, when you get someone to check in, they might just say, I'm good or whatever. And sort of seemed like people wanted an explanation of what a check-in is. So we developed something called a golden check-in. And we may be able to get that into the messages or we can certainly send out to people if they want a copy of it. I can't get it up right this second. Sophie.
I just threw it out. I just threw it out there, Arne. I don't know if everyone else can see that. It's private chat. That's right.
Yeah, no, it's probably a bit complicated. I might try next time. Anyway, a golden check-in, I can explain it. A golden check-in comes from the word golden, Golden. And D stands for how you going overall. Good, I'm great, I'm terrible, whatever, just one word. O stands for what have I been occupied with or doing? What have I been doing lately? L stands for what have I liked? What's gone well? What's going well? D, is there anything that's been difficult lately? E, is there anything I'm excited about that's coming up in the future? And N, is there any support that I need? So Golden. And we've had kids anywhere from, 4 or 5 years old talk about, how are they? What have they been doing? What have they liked? Anything they don't like? Anything they're excited about? Any support they need? Right through to adults of any age. And in some of the schools we're working with, they're using it in the classroom, they're using it in staff meetings. It's all about exactly what you're talking about, which is creating connection. And it's a great way also of conversation starter. So we have a lot of families who once a week, they sit down at dinner or after dinner and they have a golden check-in. and it's a fantastic way for families to monitor what is going on with their kids, and a lot comes out when we do that wouldn't necessarily come out, and it leads to a lot of discussion. So the golden check-in has been really successful, and I believe that if people regularly did check-ins, what would happen is we get greater connection, greater empathy, greater ability to support each other. And my sort of golden check-in is just a very much less sophisticated version of what you're talking about, but it is very much an in-person, one-on-one relationship version. Now, Ryan Griffith from Wurundjeri countries he understands the need for a check-in, which is great, but he's interested in why your process does it through technology rather than direct person to person, and wants to know whether it's a challenge of scale in the school or whether there are other advantages besides a paper trail or anonymity.
Lockie, I love the question. And, I think, I guess the essence of that, answering directly, is that sometimes, point of need, I was finding I was checking in on a lot of my mates regularly, and we're kind of coming back to the same thing a lot of the time. And this brings back some memories of some mates who went through a bit of a stint of being a hard time, saying the same things, challenge, life's really challenging, and different things. And I was creating space and doing that. But what I was finding sometimes wasn't actually remembering what we'd spoken about previously. And it was interesting. I then started doing a bit of this process on a piece of paper with myself and him, because it's not about just asking someone else. You've got to be, that vulnerability builds connection. And we end up just doing this like this, and it helped us kind of see how things are trending, or the story is the same, and how we can go from there. So that was one thing, being able to kind of track conversations and how they've trended over time. In the moment, it can be really useful for that. But then secondly, it also helps you show that you're on a bit of a positive trend line, and shows that you're maybe growing, that you can use the sense of empowerment to show, I've actually been, a 3 out of 10 before. And then I went up to an 8, and then I've gone down to 3 out of 10 again. But I know I've come through that hard time. And sometimes, you forget about the hardship that you've been in the past, and you've overcome it. But as we know, Arne, with rites of passage work, that's part of life. Challenges and comes growth. And it helps you have that ability to reflect and have a number to it to show it. And that helps me build that resilience. And I know that's how a lot of teachers have found it useful to facilitating conversations with their young people.
Yeah. And the tracking of it, the ability to track it, as you're saying, is so important. But, I know we're working and where we are recommending to them these sorts of platforms for a number of reasons. One is that whether we like it or not, technology is the thing that the kids, the children, the students really interact with these days. That's the reality. And the other thing is, some schools have got over 2,000 students these days, and it's so easy for students to sort of below the radar, and they won't necessarily talk and they won't necessarily share. But having a platform that can be offered to every single student in the year in the school, and then have a thing where a teacher or whatever, where we go, okay, Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock, everybody, let's do our iYarn check-in. And if that can help us to identify the students who are at risk and red flagging, is such an incredibly important thing. Because one of the things that research shows us is that mental health is such a major issue. Not only that, it's increasing. The research shows in the last 5 years, mental health issues have increased. And the early results coming out of COVID times is that COVID has just put it up a whole nother level again. So we believe that COVID hasn't actually caused the problems or the issues, but has sort of magnified them. And so, we know that we have a lot of students who are under the radar, especially with girls. It does seem that for boys, and not always, these are generalizations, but when boys are acting out, that's a really good sign that there's something going on that's not okay. But with a lot of girls, everything looks really good. They're well presented, they do well in class, they're polite and all those things. We think, oh, we don't have to worry about her, she's doing really well. But there are times when exactly girls like that are in fact enormously at risk because internally they've got all sorts of struggles that they don't tell anyone or no one knows about. And if platforms like iYarn can pick up those issues and create the support for them, because the final thing is, that we know students with mental health issues, when they have a problem, are still more likely to go to the internet than they are to go to a teacher or a counsellor or a psych who can genuinely support them. So any way that we can identify and be able to offer support to these students is so incredibly important. And, a platform like iYarn can do exactly that. But I have another question here. So let's say year 9, and I don't know the answer. If we put together a wheel using iYarn and it's got 6, 7 or 8 different spokes in it, can the students also put on it some of their own individual spokes so they can say, well, actually, I know an area that I need to check in on is my relationship with my younger sister or, whatever. Is that possible, Lockie?
That's what we actually really encourage a lot of the young people in the schools we work with to do that, because it starts building up that, value-based living concept around you want to check in on the areas of life that matter to you. And then, you empower the kids to do that check-in, and that's, best practice. And that's very personal, and that is where the kid has the option to share it or not, because that's private. Right. The way we've set it up is that some of that's real confidential for the young person, and maybe they don't want to share that. But then we encourage what we find is best practice is that the school starts off with a bit of a generic wellbeing check-in that they believe is appropriate. And then the next level is like actually engaging the Youth Advisory Council to co-create those check-in questions for the year group.
Oh, fantastic. So you bring the students into creating their questions.
Correct. And then the next level of that is actually when you have a year group yarn breakout session, workshop it with the kids, come up with all the different words, and then the kids they choose how frequent they want to do the check-in, and what is the frequency, what days of the week are best, and what is the best way for support. So then it's not this like traditional prescriptive approach around this is a wellbeing tool, we want you to use this, use it. If you're not using it, you're bad. It's kind of actually get the kids enrolled, and because we know that the kids care about well-being and mental health, and enroll them in the journey around this is developing healthy social emotional well-being. And when we check in, we're creating more of a supportive community for our young people. But the one things where this can sometimes not get the same engagement, if we just use iYarn like a typical survey tool, how are you going? How are you going right now? And just kind of doing the generic questions out there and not really creating a space to have a yarn about that check-in. Because otherwise, iYarn just gets put in the other basket as just being a generic survey tool. And the idea is that wheel that you have, we call it a conversation canvas, and then that can facilitate a meaningful yarn.
Yeah, great. So I love hearing that. And when we work in schools, we go and we meet with the sort of senior staff, we meet with teachers. We also always meet with the students. We ask them what they want. And one of the biggest things that they tell us is they want to have a voice. They want a voice in what's going on, and they want a voice in decisions that are going to affect their lives. So the fact that I'm hearing you say that the students actually get input into how often they use iYarn and what questions are used, and the wording that's in those questions is really tremendous.
And I've just seen Ross's question here as well, Arne. Ross talking about the next level about the specific student case management, students at risk of disengagement, behaviour and mental health struggles. So this is a big thing where we're actually, the school sites are using this as a one-on-one check-in as well, where and what we do, the high-risk young people who they have, they maybe choose the cadence. Is it a daily check-in? Or is it, weekly or every other day? But then they co-create those segments one-to-one with that young person. Because again, what we're saying, they want to be enrolled and they want to be checking in the areas they want to check in on. So that's been a really powerful way around how like school sites, chaplaincy services have been able to actually use this, and counsellors on a one-to-one case management base for sure.
Yeah, great. And also, what about the question around, has it been taken up in any remote communities?
Well, yeah, it's been cool. iYarn has been tried in Arne, One Arm Point community, Bardi people. Is just one. I don't know if you call it, it's a regional town like Broome. We've got a few schools in Broome using it. We've also, in Kununurra, we've got, Woonan, which is who we're starting to engage a lot more with, who are running a headspace up that way, look at using it for youth engagement and tracking wellbeing of the young people. The Kimberley Land Council in Broome and their regional remote communities that they have influence in, over 180 of their employees. Langford Aboriginal Association, these are Indigenous things, but on a remote community level, other than that, far up, mate. I'm just on the database. I'd have to look back to it, but I do see we've got quite far-ranging in Central Australia and Queensland. We've got a few out that way as well.
Great. And it's interesting. So Ross Harold, who's been asking some great questions, and we're speaking to his school, and they have half of their students actually are remote learning. So something like 120 students from the school are, living in remote areas and remote learning. And, it's very hard to check in one-on-one with each of them, but I can see how, a tool like iYarn could be so incredibly useful in that sort of situation.
Well, on that question, Arne, it's really interesting. Lawrence Hardgrave School, which is a school for special needs kids in New South Wales, they were doing remote, obviously lockdown. A lot of the schools in New South Wales use iYarn for lockdown, so remote. And Lawrence Hardgrave, every day they did a check-in with all the students over COVID, and compliance was 100%. This is something they did at the beginning of every day to just check in on the kids. And that was really powerful to spark conversation with the young kids. So these are kids with quite complex needs, disabilities, and also learning challenges. So it was really powerful for them.
Now, Lockie, I imagine you see a lot of sort of the high-level data that comes through iYarn, and I'm very interested to know from you what are you seeing are the kind of the main trends or issues? What would you say that we need to know about that's going on for students at school these days that you've sort of discovered through iYarn?
Yeah, so what we're able to do, we've got over 700,000 different data points now, and we can see on an aggregate level a bit of sentiment analysis. And what we can see is that schools are checking in on friends. Friends, number one, sleep and mental health are the three most common things that schools want to check in on young people on. What that tells us is that, they're the big kind of ticket items for a majority of schools. Thousands of different data points and kids checking in on those segments. What that tells us is that mental health and wellbeing and sleep hygiene is a big thing that teachers care about and students want to check in on. So what that tells us is that teachers need to be off talking and communicating about these things more. And if a teacher does not have that skill set, we've got to engage the right people to talk about that and bring that awareness up, because these are things that kids are checking in on and not necessarily flourishing at all the time. So it's important
you're saying friends, sleep hygiene, wellbeing, and mental health. And is this what the school staff want to check in on, or what the students want to check in on?
They're the most consistent segments that schools are using to check in on young people.
Yeah.
So when I say a school's chosen these segments, that could be because the Young Youth Advisory Council have chosen these segments, or it could be more newer schools that you said these are the segments we want to check in on. But what we found is that they are the segments that are most frequently being checked in on. And that is very aligned with all the data we see out there with, Positive Schools and Smiling Minds and all the research out there, is that these are the segments that people really want to check in on. And we need, as educators, not myself, but as teachers who are using the tool, what we are doing now, and it's really exciting to share this with you now, Arne, is that we've just signed an agreement with the University of Technology Sydney for a 12-month research project where we are further developing the evidence of research behind iYarn, and the core to it is developing better resources and support tools for teachers and students to have in those moments where they need more support. So this has been, it's been a huge thing to just build up that evidence. There's a lot of different platforms out there that don't necessarily have that evidence behind it. We've got it already, but we're just further developing the resources. Because what we found from COVID, Arne, is that it's cool. We've got this data, but then how do I feel equipped to have those conversations with the young person? What is best practice? So where we've got tools that have been useful and developed through our psychologists and psychologist team and wellbeing experts, but we're going to the next level now and just getting a proper research base with UTS to go to the next level.
Well done. That's a fantastic thing. It's interesting. I'm interested in what you said about the sleep hygiene. I heard some research a while ago now that young people need something like 8.5, 9 hours sleep a night. But since the introduction of mobile phones, they're getting on average 6 3/4 hours because, they're there, the phone under the blankets, or they got the phone next to their bed and it pings in the middle of the night from one of their 2,000 friends that they absolutely have to speak to. That's a big thing.
Huge. And totally, Arne. And I've just seen a few questions come here with Ryan and Ross, which talks about support to schools in building capacity of staff and meaningful yarn. So we offer PD sessions in schools, go out there, whether it's virtually on a Zoom call, how to facilitate conversations, how to create a will, how to engage in youth advisory councils, how to, all these different things. We're also, and then this other one around culturally relevant resources for Indigenous communities. What we find is at iYarn, we're really great at creating safe spaces and data collection and facilitating meaningful conversations. But you as a school, you understand your own cultural needs. So this is where we empower you to choose the support resources you want to have. We've got a bunch of resources we could suggest that are useful, but then this is where you can kind of lean into your cultural nuance and add that spark. So when I say, do you have Indigenous cultural relevant resources? Yes, we do. But then we if that's the case, we kind of lean in with that Indigenous liaison officer, Indigenous employee, Indigenous team member to make sure and just workshop some of those things that make sure it's really aligned with what we're about and culturally appropriate.
Yeah, and I guess why I'm so interested in iYarn and what you're doing is because our work, which is rites of passage, but now extends to what we call transformational education, within schools, building healthy communities, teaching critical 21st century life skills, and creating healthy rites of passage. And, a platform like iYarn really gives us an opportunity to monitor how well our work is actually impacting within the school. Are we improving the culture of the community? Are they learning the life skills that they really need? And are the rites of passage that they're going through having a healthy impact on them rather than being, wounding and traumatic and creating problems? So I can just see that there are so many different environments where iYarn could be used. And Lockie, how many schools are you in nowadays? Like I remember when you started this. I remember when you were, hey, Arne, I want to tell you about this, thing I'm developing, and where are we up to, Lockie?
Yeah, so it's been wild how just in the last, we've been working the first couple of years trying to get those testimonials and traction and things like that. But currently we're in some form of trial in over 100 schools across the country. And then we've got a number of schools who've adopted it across the whole school environment. So that's all like 1,300 students. When I say a number, we're talking about 15. And then we've got another 40 schools who are using it across different year groups. So we've got like where they say all the year 8s, all the year 10s are using it, but we haven't rolled out across the whole school ecosystem. So, you know, it's really exciting, but we've kind of at the point now where we're, you know, the Department of Education, WA, have seen it. They see the impact it has, and they really want to actually support it into more schools. So we're at a point now where we're starting to roll out to a significant large number more for 2022. So we're at a, you know, if you say the golden check-in, what do I need help with at the moment? It's about finding more people who can help us go it into more schools and create these spaces to do it. We've got a great team behind us who can help facilitate it into your schools. And we've got some really great partnerships of people who have been education experts, the Faculty Foundations, School Plus, the AAS with their community outreach programs. We're starting to collaborate a lot with our outreach. So sometimes we're getting, you know, the plan is 2022. We've got a bunch of athletes going out and actually facilitating these sessions in schools as well. So really exciting time for us, and as we ramp up into 2022.
Fantastic. People want to find out more about iYarn, Lockie. What do they do?
A great way is, I'm sure there's been a bunch of people signing up today or who are listening to the recording. You go to iYarn, so iYarn.com. You can, you know, see what it's about, the schools page. We got, you can sign up there for a bit of a free trial. So it just gives you free basic access. Feel free to do that with your school email. You can reach out to me if anyone's here, Lockie, Lockie, at iYarn.com.au. Generally, I'd love connecting with people who are like-minded, people who are tuning into this session. So I'd love to have a session, a yarn, and see if this could meet the needs of you. You know, we're not prescriptive around how your school signs up. We've got a few ways around how schools have really embraced iYarn and implemented it best practice, but we understand that each school is different. So we can have a conversation and kind of understand what your needs are. The price of iYarn is very affordable, you know, and that's, you know, we're looking at, it's about $800 per year group for the year of up to 200 students, and about $5,000 for a whole school environment. So it's not a crazy expensive tool. It's affordable, and it can really get the insights, but also mitigate some real challenges and overcome some challenges early on as primary prevention that young kids face in school environments.
Brilliant, Lockie. Brilliant. Thank you. And I want to finish tonight by just honouring you for who you are and what you're doing. I don't know exactly how long it was ago that I met you, but it'd have to be 6 years or so. I would something like that. And these things were kind of ideas for you. And, you know, I just love seeing the way you've had a vision to do something. You've created it, you've made it successful, you're getting it out there, you're making a difference. But then hearing your story, you know, hearing your connection and what happened to you at school and your connection with Indigenous communities and the work that you've done there over the years, and also now seeing you as a young father with Harvey and everything that involves. I'm really proud of you, Lockie, and love interviewing you tonight. And thank you for being you.
Thank you, Arne. It means a lot, mate. I really do appreciate that and taking that in. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. And everybody, thank you for joining us. This recording will be up and available on Facebook and LinkedIn and other platforms. So anybody who you think might be interested, please let them know. And we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.
And as we say over here in Noongar Puja, we say Borda. Borda means until next time. It's not a farewell. It's until next time, Arne. And, you know, just quickly on that one, Arne, obviously I've been so appreciative of all your mentorship and guidance and support over these years. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Good night.
Borda.
Good night, everybody.